Start recording. Yep. Okay. Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Podcast, enriching life through a podcast. Thank you for so much for pouring love and providing feedback how we can make our content better, and also suggestions to give different guests across different walks of life. Really appreciate all your time. At the same time, I would also really appreciate because in terms of getting the subscription or subscribing to our podcast, it's very essential because the more subscribers we have, we also get a lot of traction in terms of the way how different social media, artificial intelligence work. Also, a guest for us to give a different perspective about life psychology, mindset in general. So, that being said, let's start with a story. Once upon a time, a podcast host named Sarah decided to expand her team and bring new producer to help in the show. She posted a job listing on several job boards and received a flurry of application from the interesting candidates. Sarah carefully reviewed applications looking for someone with a background of audio production, excellent communication skills, and passion for the topic of the podcast. After narrowing down the field, she scheduled a series of interviews with the top candidates. The first candidate we named Chris had an impressive resume and experience. However, Sarah felt that he lacked a sense of enthusiasm for the topic of the show and may not be the best fit for her team. The second candidate, Ashley, she's newer producer with a background in music production. Although Ashley lacked experience producing podcasts specifically, but Sarah was impressed by her enthusiasm for the show topic and her willingness to learn. The third candidate, Michael, he had a strong background in journalism and previously produced a popular podcast in a similar topic. Sarah was excited about Michael's experience and felt that he would be a valuable addition to the team. Eventually, Sarah decided to offer a job to Michael. Now, what would your perspective in terms of having these candidates? Some candidates have all a different kind of experience. Some have experience but no enthusiasm. Some may have enthusiasm but not much of the experience, so on and so forth. Different permutation and combinations. I'll leave it up to you in terms of what kind of a candidate would you choose. That being said, you must have an inclination of what the topic of discussion we would be having today. Yes. So today, first of all, I would like to welcome our esteemed guest, Steven Rothberg. Steven had been a founder and the chief vision officer of the College Recruiter. He's been doing this, I would say, a business for a while. I have researched that more than 2 decades. So he has a lot of experience in terms of not only what a talent acquisition hiring process looks like, but also how the hiring process has evolved over 2 decades. So, Stephen, welcome to the show.
It is a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all mine. So, Stephen, I was going through some of the information about how you evolved, and you also mentioned about some of the stint in the high school and school you did in terms of the fantasy hockey league, for example. So, I would like to know that whether that experience of the fantasy hockey league has influence in your approach to the entrepreneurial gig which you are doing at this point.
Okay, so interesting. I've never been asked a question like that. This will be fun. So um, I guess for the listeners who might not know what a fantasy hockey league is, it's really
Yes.
no different than football, whether that's American football or what most of the world would regard as real football, or baseball, or any other sport, where you usually get a bunch of friends together
Hmm.
and you pick different players, and based upon things like, goals, assists, um, runs, touchdowns, whatever point scoring scheme that sport has, the players on your fictitious or fantasy team
Hmm.
will get points, and whoever picks the best team, whichever of your friends picks the best team at the end of the year, um, might get a lot of bragging rights, maybe some money, whatever. So I was a co-organizer in high school, 11th grade. I was probably about 16 years old, of a fairly small, fairly informal fantasy league with there were 15 teams, so 14 friends and me. A couple of our high school teachers participated in it, and it was really my first exposure. This is back in like 82, I think, the fall of 1982. And it was my first exposure to using an electronic spreadsheet. It
Hmm.
was before Microsoft Excel. It was the first or second version of Lotus 123. So yeah, I'm old.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but that exposure to creating a spreadsheet to more easily keep track of the points and how the teams were ranking, and being able to sort and select much more quickly than if I had done it on paper, eventually led me into the career that I'm in. Because what it did is it gave me a lot of exposure at a fairly young age to something that was pretty new at the time, which was personal computers.
Hmm.
And that led me to being a lab instructor for one of those teachers. He was my computer science teacher as well. And eventually led me, when I created this business in 1991, the business that College Recruiter grew out of, to always be looking for ways to use automation, not just to improve the efficiency of the process and mostly saving time, maybe money,
Hmm.
but also to improve the effectiveness. I could always see through my use of computers, software, that they can help you see things that you might not otherwise have seen by running more tests, by doing better statistical analysis,
Hmm.
etc. And so when I created this business in 1991, what the first few years, pardon me, were
Hmm.
what the product was, basically campus maps. So picture like a 18 by 24 inch, like couple feet by a few feet, or paper map that would unfold. It would have a map of a college or university campus in the middle, and I sold advertising around the borders of that to restaurants, retailers. So the
Hmm.
business model basically was a restaurant, apartment companies, et cetera, would advertise on the map. I would give the maps for free to the university, which would then give them for free to the incoming students, the freshmen, first year students. A few years later, I added a magazine that had employment ads in it, same kind of business model. Businesses advertised in it, gave them away for free to the university career service offices, which then gave them to the graduating students. Here in the U.S., we usually refer to them as seniors. Other areas of the world, like where I grew up in Canada, they'd be fourth year students, etc. Um, and then this thing called the internet came along in the mid 90s. And that's when we created the job board. And that's really what the business is today, and has been for for a couple decades. So collegerecruiter.com.
That's great. Yeah. So that's why this question I ask, because what I felt so far in all of my interviews as well, that there's always some dots which has to be joined. Like when
Hmm.
someone starts something, either they're entrepreneurs, they are in leadership role. Back in the day, they must have sown some kind of seeds in certain kind of activities, and
Yeah.
it helps to understand people who are watching this podcast is that it's not a eureka moment every time. There
Right.
may be something which you might have done in the past. You'll say, I think I might have something in me which helps. So, not everyone is born leader, not everyone is born entrepreneur most of the time. I would say 99% of the time, unless you are some kind of prodigy. In that case, hence this question, and thanks for providing that, like how a few of the things which you have done in your high school days or in your school days have really transformed into thinking, as you mentioned about maps. And I got to know that you work with your wife
Hmm.
in the business and try to work around these maps and see that how exactly we can kind of scale your learnings to uh, doing something more in terms of maybe making a difference and making people's life in terms of their careers. So, and hence you started this particular company. So, tell us more about a high-level overview of what exactly you guys do and why you are different from other job recruitment endeavors.
Yeah, at a very high level, College Recruiter believes that every student and recent graduate deserves a great career. And what we mean by that, it's a job search site. So if you're familiar with, say, Indeed, LinkedIn, um, years ago, the more dominant sites were Monster, Career
Monster.
Builder, etc. The business model of a job board, or some people would call it a recruitment marketplace, is generally the same as those maps that I published decades ago, the magazines, and even the earliest versions of our job search site or job board. And that is the employers, the pay to advertise their job openings. Now, with College Recruiter, we are what is called a niche job board. We focus on a particular segment of the labor market. In our case, it's jobs and career opportunities that are suitable for a typical college or university student or recent graduate. We look at jobs that require 0 to 3 years of experience as being in our niche. So, if your employer is looking to hire one person or 1,000 people and they should have 5+ years of experience, we're going to say that's not a good fit. Don't advertise those jobs on our site. But if they're part-time, seasonal, internship, or what we call entry level or early career, 0 to 3 years of experience, then that's a good fit. A few years ago, actually about 6 or so years ago now, the business model changed somewhat in terms of not who our customers were. We're in a double-sided marketplace. One customer group are the candidates. They don't pay us, but we regard them as customers. It's sort of how you communicate with them, how you talk to them, how you regard them. And the other customer group would be the employers that advertise their job openings. And that's where our revenue comes from. But until 5, 6 years ago, almost exclusively that revenue was on what we call a traditional duration basis. And that's the way that advertising has almost always been purchased. An employer will run a job posting ad. They might spend a couple $100, and that ad will run for 30 days. That's the typical job board model. You might get applications, you might not get applications, you might hire someone, you might not hire someone. It's just advertising. No guarantees, but if it works, you're going to come back and buy more from that media source. 5, 6 years ago, what happened is we started to have a couple of customers that asked, if they spent more money with us, could we deliver more applicants to them? So rather than paying for an ad to run for 30 days, what they wanted to do was to more closely align our interests with theirs and pay us on a performance basis. If we perform by delivering more applicants to them, they would pay us more. So We weren't certainly not the first to do this, but we were early. We created a pay-per-click product. So the job seeker would see the posting on collegerecruiter.com. They would click on our apply button to go over to the employer's website to apply. When they clicked to go over to the employer's website to apply, the employer paid us for that click. And it's typically somewhere in the 50 cents to $1 range. That migration in our pricing model from that traditional duration based to a performance based pricing model was incredibly important. It has allowed us to really scale up and much better serve the customers that we have. It's allowed us to last year, we almost doubled revenues. Those were almost double the year before as well. We're looking to probably double again this year. So it's really been very important. And it's interesting to me because the US job board market is far ahead of most other countries in the world. Canada and the UK are catching up quickly in that migration to a performance-based pricing model. It requires people to be really good at math, both on the vendor side, the job board side, and also on the customer side, on the employer side. And if both aren't, it just doesn't work. So you've probably experienced that in your work too. You really
Yes.
have to have an informed customer in order to have a happy customer.
Definitely, I totally agree with that, and I'm happy you mentioned about changing the business model some 6 or 7 years back. And I think at that time, what I have recall that you also have revamped the overall business model, bringing your mission statement, and also
Mhm.
try to kind of work. And this is more towards, I think, a value-based pricing model
Mhm.
instead of getting just pay and run the ads, because once you run the ads, you're off the hook, right? In
Yeah.
value-based, it would be a mutual interest. People are motivated, both the sides, and they try to make sure that you perform, because that's how you will be paid. And then obviously the client would also be interested because they know that because of your success, their success also lies. So that's a great point, and I think this is something now a lot of businesses are working as well in that perspective. So yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, you have a thought on that?
Yeah, no, I was just, it theoretically, it can apply to any industry, any product that you're selling. That there are a lot of businesses out there that will be very liberal or lenient with their guarantees, right? If you're not fully satisfied, let us know and we'll refund your money. Right? You
Mhm.
see that in loads
Yeah.
of industries. It could be formal, it could be informal. If you go to a restaurant, you buy a steak and the steak is really awful, if it's a decent
Mm.
restaurant, and I don't necessarily mean fancy, but just well run, it can be a very casual restaurant and be very well run. The manager, the owner is likely to say, you know what, we're not going to charge you for that. Um, and that's a performance-based pricing model. They are aligning their interests with yours. If you're not happy, then they know in the long run they're not happy either. So both the customer and the vendor need to be happy in order
Yeah.
for that model to work. And it also requires ethical business, because if the customer goes into the restaurant, eats the whole steak, actually enjoys it, and then to just get a free meal complains about it, that model doesn't work long term. Um, that customer is not going to be able to come back to that
Yeah.
restaurant and expect to be able to get a free steak again. And in the business world, when there are a relatively limited number of vendors and customers, people they get to know each other pretty quickly. And if a customer has a history of being dishonest, what ends up happening is in the short term, it can be beneficial to them, but in the long term, they run out of good vendors. And that just kills their business.
Definitely, totally agree with that. So let's kind of get to what you have started some 6, 7 years back. Let's go further back to a flashback, and then again take a journey in a way. Uh, so because you've been there like more than I would say now 3 decades in that
Yeah.
perspective of hiring, not two. So, in that perspective, how exactly the hiring process has evolved so far? You
Mm.
mentioned about what is the client expectation, maybe the companies or organizations. How about the candidates? So, in your 3 decades, you must have seen people from baby boomers to Gen Zs to right now Gen Zs, millennials. So, how exactly the talent has changed? If you kind of provide some insights on that journey.
Yeah. So, baby boomers, stereotypically, loads of exceptions, but
Mhm,
baby boomers, one of the characteristics of that generation is that they lived to work. I think is a
mm,
cliche that people say, right? It's working, making money, climbing the corporate ladder, getting that corner office. That was all much more important to them than to succeeding generations. I'm a Gen Xer, so next in line.
mhm,
Baby boomers are the ones that are retiring en masse. I think I heard a couple of days ago that in the US, there are 10,000 baby boomers a day that are retiring. For 20 years, we've been talking about the baby boomers are going to retire. The baby boomers are going to retire. Guess what they are? Um,
mm,
the oldest baby boomers are actually, elderly now. They were born in 1945, and so you see a lot of them in assisted living and nursing homes and et cetera, well past the age where they're going to be working for that oldest cohort of them. My generation, the Gen Xers, one of the smaller generations, about half as many as the baby boomers and about half as many as the millennials that came after us. Our generation was had, I would say, more work-life balance. We are very career motivated, and yet we also place more value on traveling, vacations, experiences, etc. We're not as likely to put as much importance on having a big fancy house and having fancy things and having lots of stuff as a typical baby boomer, but we are more likely to put value on that than, say, a millennial. For a long time, people thought of millennials as being um, high school students, college students, whatever. And they were, of course, at one point. But millennials, by and large, are in their 30s now. And so very often are married, they own a house, they have kids, they've got, 2.2 dogs, that whole thing. And so they are definitely not the typical student or recent grad. Um, that generation is, as you were saying, Gen Z, or for those listeners outside of the US, Gen Z.
yes.
That's the youngest generation in the workforce right now, and they are further along that spectrum. They, instead of living to work, they are more working to live. They don't have the same sense of optimism that if they work hard, they'll be rewarded. Baby boomers very much felt that way. If I put in a real hard day's work, week, month, year, etc., eventually I will be rewarded. I'll have financial security. I'll be able to afford that big, fancy house in the suburbs. Gen Z doesn't, by and large, believe that that will ever happen. And so it's kind of like beating your head against a brick wall. At some point, you just say, "What's the point?" and you shift your priorities. And so I think we see that with Gen Z. They are much more likely to want flexible work. They're
Mhm,
much more likely to demand a that they're treated well, not put up on a pedestal, but treated with respect in the job application process and in the workspace, in the workforce. And they're much less likely to believe that anything that they can do will cause them to be paid well, that it's more subsistence. And so instead of trying to place a lot of value on a fancy house or things, they place more value on experiences. So employers of Gen Z find that one way of keeping those employees happy and retaining them is to give them a lot of flexibility. That might be more vacation. It might be more comp time. You know, hey, you worked, you know, 12 hours yesterday. Why don't you take, tomorrow morning off? That kind of thing. At College Recruiter, a couple of years ago, we implemented what we call a monthly wellness day. In addition to the standard paid time off for vacation days and sick days and holidays like, Christmas Day, New Year's, etc. Every day we get an additional day off. The entire company the same day. And that kind of benefit doesn't really cost us anything, but it provides huge value to our employees. And we see that across all the generations in our company. I think at the end of the day, the biggest difference that I see from one end of the spectrum, the Gen Z, to the other end of the spectrum, baby boomers, is that the Gen Z are the most likely to place the most value on those benefits that provide them with greater happiness, better ability to take some time, be with friends, experience life, learn new skills, that type of thing, and they are much more likely to say, I'm never going to work for that employer because they don't treat their employees well, or their mission is corrupt or destructive to society. They want to be part of something bigger and better than themselves,
Yeah.
more so than just a paycheck.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, there's always a evolution between different generations, as you rightly put, from baby boomers to Gen Z. How the overall the mindset, how the overall I would say the psychology of taking things and
Mm.
accepting things has been changed. Uh, Obviously, there's a pros and cons in a way from organizations. They have to be more inclusive, diverse, try to understand the employee side of the house. In some of the instances, from the organization perspective, that also would be a tricky affair because then the retention of the employees would be tougher because
Hmm.
we move from the industrial revolution to the information revolution. Now it's a social revolution. So if you don't
Yeah.
like something, just get your smartphone, search few things, talk to the people. There you go. So that is become so employee retention, and that is also one of the things which definitely you might have looked into it. So that being said, in all those things, what are the key challenges which you are looking at this point, which from your organization perspective, the overall recruitment strategy, which you are
Hmm.
really have seen that this is something which is missing at this point, and we are
Mm.
actively working on it, which is still a gap in terms of macro level because the other folks are not doing that, but you guys are definitely trying to work towards that. So what are those key insights and recruitment strategies?
That College Recruiter is, or just that
Yeah, the
in
college, I think that's where your niche is. Yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah.
Hmm.
So, um, the big general job boards, the Indeeds, the LinkedIn's, etc. ZipRecruiter. In other areas of the world, you've got Seek out of Australia, you've got Stepstone out of Germany. Um, they all do, I think, by and large, a really good job of servicing both customer groups, the candidate and the employer. But by definition, they don't do they don't really focus on any particular niche or sector. And so the content, the jobs, the language, the way the sites operate, the employers that are on there, the opportunities that are on there are by and large not well targeted to the niche that we serve, that student
Okay.
and recent grad niche. And of course, the reverse is true also. If you've got 12 years of experience, we're a terrible place to come and search for a job. So, one of the benefits of a niche job board like a college recruiter is that everything that we do, it should be well aligned to the audiences that we serve, whether it's the employers who are looking for those early career candidates or whether it's the candidates themselves who are looking for those opportunities. The other thing that I think we do exceptionally well, especially as compared to most other sites, not only in the US, but even more so internationally, is that pay for performance model. One of the things that a lot of job boards that are just sort of starting to get into that pricing model, a pay per click pricing model, that they sort of discover is that not only does it better align their interests with the employer, because, hey, if you don't deliver candidates, you don't get paid. But interestingly, a happy accident that we discovered is that it also better aligns you with the candidates. Because if you don't have the right jobs advertised on your site, then the candidates who come to your site won't pull up those jobs. They won't click to the employers. So it continually provides a really powerful financial incentive to us to better serve both customer groups rather than
Mhm.
just, and I think a few minutes ago you said something like kind of like a take it or leave it. People referring to job board industry will talk about post and pray, post a job opening and pray that you get results. When it's pay per click, prayer isn't enough. you have to be able to get some checks from your customers to make your payroll, and so we have a more powerful incentive to make sure it works. Something that I think is often missing from how job boards view the marketplace, and I think more importantly how employers view the marketplace, is that they fail to see that it's a process. You can't just post an ad and expect a flood of highly qualified candidates to walk through your door for you to just extend a job opening or offer. And simply because you've extended an offer, of course, that person is going to say yes. And then they start tomorrow and they're 100% productive. You're
Mhm.
missing a bunch of steps in that process. And some job board owners and leaders forget that we're at the top of the recruitment funnel. It's like where the candidates start to come into the process. We're nowhere close to the bottom of the funnel, which is when that candidate has been hired and they're being onboarded. We tend to overvalue our place in that process and wrongly discount all of the other things that employers need to do well in order for that hiring process to work well.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned few important things as well. Is about in a short like niches is where you have all the riches, because that's where where you because when you go to a pretty laser focused initiatives, you know that what are the different expectations. As you know, as you rightly mentioned, it's a whole process, so which means that it's not just putting a kind of posting and expecting a lot of things in terms of the returns from both the sides. And as you are focused more towards the college hours, you know each and everything. You have so much of experience, because obviously the requirements, demand, psyche for a college hire or fresh grad, so 0 to 3 years in your
Mhm.
case, versus a pretty experienced people, they are totally a different way of handle. So you cannot have a kind of cast your net across the board and catch all kind of mindset, because that doesn't work for you, that doesn't work for the candidates. So that's a great way to kind of put in terms of getting that balance. So there are also a lot of questions around the implementation of artificial intelligence in terms of
Mm.
kind of going through and sniffle through the resumes. Are you guys also implementing that, or what's your view around you using these emerging technologies in kind of getting the right candidates?
Yeah. So we are using AI and have been for it's probably about 5 years now, but not as you described.
Hmm.
And it's not that I disagree with that or think it's a bad approach. It's just simply we haven't done that. So
Hmm.
like no judgment, not like we're better or anything like that. It's just we took a different approach. So something like 5 years ago, Google released what they now call Google Cloud.
Hmm.
They initially called it Google, I think it was Job Discovery, and then it was Google Talent Solutions. But basically, what it is that they license to hundreds of job boards, one of which is College Recruiter, and also applicant tracking systems, which is kind of the software, the database that if you go to a large employer's website and you search the job openings and apply, and then the recruiters on the employer side then manage your application process. Did we do the background screening? Have we extended a job offer? That type of stuff. So Google licenses their search software to job boards and ATS. The actual data comes from, in our case, the job postings on College Recruiter. So we're not getting the underlying data, the search results from Google. It's just the actual search software. That search software uses AI. And one of the ways that it uses that is the classic example that Google will talk about is if you are a somebody in, say, San Francisco and working for like Amazon Web Services, AWS, and you're working on servers, network servers, internet servers, etc. The boxes, the hardware that sort of powers the internet along with a lot of other systems, then you might come to a job board and type looking for a new job, and you might type in the keyword field server and for the location San Francisco, California. So typical job board, when they see the word server, they're going to just look through the job posting ads for that same keyword, server. But context matters, because what if you were actually looking for a job as a waiter in San
Hmm.
Francisco? So you're still a server is the same word.
Yeah.
The English language is a stupid thing. We use the same words for lots of different things. But
Yeah.
so if you have a history when you come to College Recruiter of searching for waiter positions, restaurant, food service, hospitality, our search is going to learn that what you mean by server is waiter jobs.
Got
Where
it.
somebody else, when they're putting in server and they're looking for computer hardware related jobs, they're going to see different results than you will. So, same search, same location, very different results. And that's powered by AI. There are, as you were mentioning, Saurabh, there are a number of companies out there that are using AI to basically read, decipher, etc. resumes, and in an attempt to better match up the resumes or CVs with job posting ads or job descriptions. So you get in a resume from a candidate and the AI looks at it, reads it, understands it, hopefully, and then says, she would be a great fit for this job and maybe this job and this job. So I'm going to match them. Matching technology has always been a dream of in the job board industry, and it quite frankly has never worked well. And one of the problems with it is that AI requires a tremendous amount of highly relevant data, and it has to learn. Inherent in the process of looking at a resume and comparing it to a job description is that resumes are backward-looking documents. They reflect what you've done, and they don't really reflect what you want to do. Job descriptions, on the other hand, are the opposite. They reflect what you want the candidate or the new hire to do, not so much what they've done. There is some overlap. In the job description, you often have requirements, and in resumes or CVs, you sometimes have objective statements. But it's harder than it looks. And I do think that a year from now or several years from now, we're going to start to see some AI that does a really good job with that. But I think we're first going to see that in jobs that require 4, 5, 6 or plus years of experience. So you can really see the track record of that candidate, relevant jobs, relevant work experience to the actual job that they're potentially being hired for. And I also think we're going to see it in fields where the skills are more hard and less soft. So software engineering, where do you have experience with this software, this software, this software, this software? Less so with jobs that require things like, critical thinking, customer service skills. How do you define that you are a happy person, that you have good customer service skills? It's harder to quantify that. So I think AI will first succeed in that matching with experienced software developers, engineers, professions like that. A general site like ours, in terms of being across all industries, all occupational fields, and also early career, we're going to be, I think, amongst the last where you're going to see AI work really well, because there's just not that much data. Right? If you're a college student, what kind of work experience do you have? Maybe you have an internship or two. You've probably got 3 jobs on your resume that talk about delivering, DoorDash and being a babysitter and, mowing lawns. And how is that relevant to you finding an entry-level job as an engineer? The AI is just not going to get that.
Yeah, I think it's like kind of more, we need better data modelings and more contextual data, and then try to kind of have those reasoning skills in AI to understand what is, as you rightly mentioned, difference between the server in the IT infrastructure versus a server in the waiter, or those kind of perspectives. So that's rightly mentioned. I think that will keep on evolving. Also, how the Chat GPT and all those things are coming into the play. You will definitely would be everyone would be interesting to how to put some kind of a human aspect, because AI can only do what it's been feed on. But now how the AI would try to make some decisions, which in the case of ambiguity, that is something which would be interesting to look into the future. Let's quickly get into the last part of our segment. I'll have a couple of questions in terms of call of action, so that the viewers and listeners would take some advice from you and some insights. So in terms of the, I would say, the recruitment process from the candidate perspective, and specifically the people who are, like, maybe I would say millennials like me, or Gen Zs, what's your advice? Maybe 2 or 3 things which either they, or irrespective of that, in order to be successful in these in their career, what's your advice that they should be having, no matter what the skill set they have, no matter which area you work? What's your advice? Look, maybe the 3 points you would like to convey here.
Yeah. So the first thing is that most commonly when I have a conversation like that with a friend, with a family member, the question often is, I don't know what I want to do. Right. So the first step is you have to figure out, what is it that you want to do, and the best way that I know to describe that process from a practical standpoint is I tell that friend, that family member, get a sheet of paper, legal pad, whatever, and draw a few vertical lines and then a line across the top. What you want to do is create 3 columns.
Yeah.
The first column across the top of it, you write the word competencies. The second column, you write interests. And the third column, you write values. And then brainstorm. Under competencies, list everything that you're good at. It doesn't have to be, it shouldn't only be things that are work related. If you love playing video games and you're really good at playing video games, put that down. If you are good at crochet, put that down. If you are somehow like really good at figuring out if your favorite baseball team is going to win that game, put that down. Everything that you're good at. Interests, same sort of thing. Everything that you like to do. And then values, everything that's important to you. And that might be social justice. That might be, helping out your neighbor, with cooking or whatever it is, but things that matter to you. It could be making lots of money. We all have different preferences. Then step back and literally blur your eyes, almost go a little tiny bit cross-eyed and look at that whole sheet all together and look for commonalities. You're going to inevitably find a few things that you're really good at, competencies that you really like to do, interests that really matter to you, values. Circle those. Now you've got some stuff to focus on. And then think about, okay, when I put those things together, what kinds of jobs or occupational fields lend themselves well to all 3 of those? Very short tangent. My father was really good at math, and he was in what they called in Canada a chartered accountant, in the US a CPA, as a certified public accountant, and he thought it was like the most boring job in the world. So he's really good at it and really wasn't interested in it. From a values perspective, it was good. It provided him with a good living, and he was able to help people. But the interests, it just wasn't there. If he had done that CIV analysis, competency, interests, and values, he never would have become an accountant. Then, once you've kind of narrowed down those occupational fields, do research. LinkedIn is a great source of information. Glassdoor, Indeed, just Google, hey, ChatGPT now, and look for organizations that offer those kinds of jobs. For those who are earlier in their career, they're less likely to realize that if they're looking for a job as, say, an accountant, it isn't just accounting firms that offer that. Almost every company of any size has accountants that work for it. The same cannot be said of occupational therapists, but even with occupational therapists, some of them work in hospitals, some of them work in doctors' offices, some of them make house calls, some of them are traveling. There are all these different kinds of ways of being an occupational therapist. Narrow those down. I was part of a what was called a career advisory board that was sponsored by DeVry University, and this think tank did some research to determine the optimal number of jobs that you should be applying to. How many job applications should you basically have open at any given time? I was shocked when the research came back and it said 5. Any fewer than that, you are likely applying to too few jobs, which made sense to me. If you only apply to 1 or 2 jobs, you're kind of putting too many eggs into that 1 or 2 baskets.
Mm-hmm.
But what I was really shocked at was that even 6 was too many for any kind of a job at any kind of experience level. And the reason is you spend too much time applying to jobs, not enough time researching the organization and really understanding who its customers are, who its vendors, who its partners, the people you'd be working with, etc. If you keep it to 5, you should have loads of time to really know that organization. Who's the hiring manager? Who does she work with? Where did she go to school? So when you are interviewed and you are pursuing a job with them, you are inevitably going to come across as far more interested in them and therefore far more interesting to them. Then you're going to hopefully have multiple job offers to choose from. But whether you have 1 or whether you have 3, be sure that you don't settle. So don't do the baby boomer, the stereotypical baby boomer thing of, well, I wanted a job as an occupational therapist. They're offering me a job as an occupational therapist, and the pay is good. Therefore, it's a yes. Okay. We don't need to do that as a society anymore. We should all work for companies that both pay us well and treat us well. Nobody should have to settle anymore. I don't mean pay well as in everybody gets, puppies and unicorns and gets all the money in the world that they could ever hope for. What I mean is you're paid fairly for the work that you're doing. If your employer is offering you $12 an hour and you can do similar work for an employer across the street at $18 an hour, $18 an hour is fair pay. Is paying well in that comparison. And also the treating well. Employers do need you to put in a good day's work. They do need you to be productive. So it's not about giving you a paycheck and you can do anything you want, including nothing. No, you do have to provide work well, but nobody should have to put up with going into work and being stressed all the time, whether that's because of your boss or your coworkers or the work environment, right? We should go to work and we should mostly enjoy what we're doing. We should be mostly interested, not totally. There are bad parts of every job. Everybody's going to have bad days and bad weeks, but you shouldn't dread going to work, right? Monday morning when you wake up, you should be like, cool, I'm looking forward to the week. Yeah, there's going to be some bad stuff. I know Wednesday there's a bad meeting that I'm going to be part of, but that's okay because the rest of the week I'm going to enjoy it.
I know we definitely, that itself is a big topic to discuss about the motivation and getting the passion. And as you mentioned about your father, that he used to be skillful, but he may not be passionate enough to get into the job which he was looking. And just to summarize what you mentioned, the CIV approach is a competency, interest, and value is something which you have to work, as Steven rightly mentioned, and try to see that if that is providing you some good direction to apply for the jobs and then try to take it from there. Obviously, everyone has their own experience. So that's a great point in terms of the takeout about the CIV metrics and approach. The last question would be, what is one advice, or I would say one, if you would like to give someone advice and what you have learned from the mentor, which is still sticking around in your life, what is that one thing which you would like to tell everyone here?
Sure. So the best mentor that I ever had was when I was in grad school. It was my boss was, I had a couple bosses at the company Honeywell. Both of my bosses were great, but the second one was more of a mentor. His name was Marv Granath. He was a senior vice president. And what Marv taught me was that corporate politics can be a good thing, not only for yourself, but for those that you work with and for the organization. And what Marv showed me was that politics done well means that you understand what the other person needs and wants, and you understand what you need and you want. And it's about creating win-win relationships. So you want to figure out when you're working with somebody, in a meeting with them, doing work with them, how to help them succeed. the more that you do that, the more that most of those people, not all, but most of those people are then going to want to make sure that you succeed as well. So when people talk about politics, corporate politics being a bad thing, it is when it's done badly, when it's about you at the cost of others. Life is not a zero-sum game. Create win-wins.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, I heard it's interesting to know corporate politics with the win-win situation, as you interestingly put forward. So that's a great point to kind of ponder upon for the users out there. So that being said, Steven, thank you so much for providing the time, providing some aspects that how you created your journey from your childhood to the place where you are. We discuss about the way what would be the mindset of the organizations and the candidates and the recruitment companies like you, how they kind of bind together in a synergical manner so that it would be a win-win-win situation for everyone. And also we discuss about what are the key takeaways from the CIV metrics, sorry, not mattress. And maybe I didn't sleep well today. And
then there's no
and
win-win.
exactly. And the last point is obviously about the corporate politics with the win-win situation. So that's great. So I really wish you all the best for the organization and your future endeavor. And I think one thing I just missed out to call out that you have a podcast as well. If you quickly give a kind of what is the name of the podcast and where people can listen to you, that would be great.
Yeah, they're actually two. So I'm the co-host of the first podcast, Inside Job Boards and Recruitment Marketplaces podcast. And the second one, I am the host, and that's the High Volume Hiring podcast. Google them; they'll come up. They're on every Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, that's great. That's great information. So again, Steven, thank you so much for coming on the show.